Greetings!
When I installed the Halo Infinite campaign, I didn't exactly think I was downloading the new Spider-Man spin-off, but here we are. So, in the previous video, I asked the question, is Halo back, without actually following it up with an answer. So, is it? Well, about 9 years ago on the 6th of November, we all brought home our copy of Halo 4 after literally 5 years of anticipation, awaiting the sequel to one of the greatest games of all time. And it was actually going quite well, up until about, well, less than 2 minutes into the first cutscene, where immediately you could just tell something was off. And, well, to beat a dead horse, it just didn't feel like Halo anymore. So many core staples of the franchise had been changed without causal explanation. Like how they tried to explain Chief's drastic armor change as an upgrade made by nanobots or whatever the fuck that was supposed to be. This was my first real feeling of, well, I guess disassociation with something that I genuinely loved. The shit was just jarring, and it's a shame because even with all of that, I did actually enjoy Halo 4's narrative, but that feeling of unfamiliarity ultimately casted a really big shadow on the whole thing. Like, this was supposed to be the sequel to Halo 3? Something just didn't feel right. Then, with what happened on the Master Chief Collection, followed by this, I doubt I even need to go into what happened here, do I? To be a Halo fan over the last 10 years has been something comparable to a toxic relationship, and I remember that feeling all 3 releases gave me distinctly, somewhat similar to watching Season 8 of Game of Thrones or just Star Wars in general. We haven't had a real Halo game since Reach, and for many even Halo 3, so where exactly does that leave Halo Infinite? So before I begin, I'm just going to put another spoiler warning here, just in case any of you manage to fall through the cracks. If you've not played this yet, you need to get off this video now and come back when you're done. So what exactly is this game about then? Well, it's actually quite difficult to summarize this game in one sentence. See, if you look at Halo 1, it's essentially just about finding a super weapon and having to destroy it. Halo 2 is, well, a complete narrative masterpiece. I mean, Jesus Christ, how do I even begin with this game? And then Halo 3 is just about finishing the fight. Now, I've got to admit, Infinite is definitely no Halo 2, but it does put up a pretty good fight, giving us a story of the Chief, the pilot and the weapon, being stuck in a dangerous, mysterious place far away from home, picking up the pieces, following a deadly conflict against the Banished that's been going on 6 months prior, and, well, the Banished are, well, up to no good to say the least. Now, throughout the game you essentially follow 4 or 5 different plot lines, ranging from figuring out what actually happened to Cortana, what the Banished are up to, as well as the brewing conflict between Escharum and the Chief, along with what happened to Atriox, which leads on to the whole Endless thing. But then you've also got this prequel story that's been intertwined with the campaign, playing out through both audio logs and these data clusters that Chief and the weapon seem to come across, which essentially gives us the conclusion to the whole Guardian storyline, and more so the actual death of Cortana. And there's a new race that managed to survive the firing of the Halo rings, and some time travel shit. I think I'm gonna need a hidden Xperia video long before I even begin trying to break these guys down. And, well, I really enjoyed it. I think it goes without saying that 343 have done a great job here. It's definitely not perfect, and I'm gonna go into some of these imperfections later on in the video, but this is everything I've needed as a Halo fan. I've been pretty disenchanted with the franchise for a long time now, and having a game like this made it feel so good to be a Halo fan again. Like shit, I'm genuinely excited for a Halo release again. Not like how I used to be during the release of this game, where I intentionally tried to be as apprehensive as possible. I didn't want to be hyped up and have all of these expectations just to be disappointed again. I just wanted to have fun on a Halo game and be brought back into a universe I'm familiar with, and to be fair, that's exactly what I got here, so I may as well begin by breaking down what I think the game actually did well. So, starting with the gameplay, which is just so fucking good. I made that Spider-Man joke at the start of this video, but the grappling hook was the best thing they added, no joke. Being able to swing in and out of any situation, or just being able to make some ridiculous jumps or survive certain death, I couldn't actually believe how much of an impact this had on the overall experience, and it just made exploring so much more enticing. As soon as you've unlocked that upgrade that increases the recharge time, it makes literally anything climbable, which again made the exploring so fun. I had a blast just fucking around seeing what things were hidden in caves and climbing spots, as well as just getting to all the cool viewpoints. Being able to rescue marine squads and secure bases and strongholds was also just fun. Killing enemies is actually a blast, and I don't know what they've done here exactly, but how each enemy reacts and plays is just done very well. Granted, until the Sentinels got introduced, it did almost start to go into the repetitive territory, but I'll go into that a little bit more later. but the boss fights were all for the most part so much fun. I can't understate the enjoyment I had here. The storytelling is just phenomenal, genuinely. Between the writing, characters, the fucking fantastic soundtrack, I mean, just listen to this. This soundtrack is easily a 10 out of 10. I mean, they've actually nailed this. As much as I hate to say it, but I think the fans can finally stop campaigning for Marty to return. Not even to take away from his work either, him and Michael Salvatore are literally goated. But what these three have made here, along with all the other brilliant minds, is fucking remarkable. I'm honestly gonna run out of adjectives soon. The cinematography is just excellent here, and blending all of that with the performances, they've managed to deliver something really engaging that honestly just leaves you wanting more. This game faced the task of being both a conclusion and a beginning, and I think it does its best to navigate the mess of the previous game. I had so much fun just going between the different plot threads trying to piece together what's actually going on here, and overall just experiencing the story being told here. Every character has done so well, from the Chief, which is undoubtedly the best version of the Chief we've actually seen so far. Like, he's still the stoic one-liner that we know and love, but he's actually emotional here in a way that feels natural and works for the story. Plus, some of his lines crack me up.
Are you ready?
What do you think?
I already told you that the odds aren't great.
For them.
Now, this is a Chief that's been defeated both physically and emotionally, surrounded by a cast full of characters with their own understandable motivations, which you do actually find out towards the end of the game. I say this because for a good duration of the game I really had no clue what was actually going on with some of these characters, which at the time I did take as a negative, but to be fair, the whole sense of mystery really did add to the experience. Don't get me wrong, there was a lot of confusion initially, and they definitely held back a lot of information, but I feel like we were given everything we need to speculate on. This is Halo through and through, and while I do think the age of the more mature Halo games is coming to an end, I definitely see this as an excellent start of something here. In essence, the reset button has kind of been hit here, but not in a way that really takes away from any of the previous stories we all love, but more in a sense that they can really go anywhere from here. They're no longer written into a hole like they have been for the previous games, and it just seems like they've really nailed the formula here, starting with the whole Chief and weapon dynamic. I think she was great. I've seen some criticisms about her being annoying, but I didn't really get that. Granted, I wasn't a fan of whenever she brought up sarcasm, I've got to admit, but outside of that I thought she was a very well written character, and Jen Taylor's performance was excellent as usual. How she's able to play 3 different characters on screen is incredible, and I think she's got to be given some extra well-deserved recognition for her work, not only here but throughout the entire fucking franchise. I mean, the weapon here feels like a completely new character. Despite her being a direct clone of Cortana, she has this new naive spin that clashes well with this abrasive Chief, which allows for so many interesting conversations and character moments. I was actually a bit untrusting of her initially. See, I had this suspicion that she might even be Cortana in disguise, but I'm not entirely sure what I was thinking there. Ultimately though, I've got no complaints. They managed to pass the torch well here in a way that doesn't feel disrespectful, though if they do end up calling her Cortana, I do have a feeling we might be falling into that territory. Cortana to me is a completely different character who, on top of having all of those separate memories of Chief, also started to begin a galaxy-wide genocide across multiple species, so I don't think her being called Cortana would be too appropriate personally. But, I mean, I will try and be open-minded, though I think a different name would make a lot more sense. Now, going back to the character dynamics, I think the pilot was a great addition to the cast. I've seen some people complain that he's too scared and whiny, but the guy's not even a soldier. He's literally a volunteering engineer who's been stuck on his own for 6 months without food and water. I guess I'll just avoid looking into that one for the time being, but no, he's a great cast member without even needing to directly pivot the plot. He's just there to add a new layer to the dynamic Chief is having with the cast, and I think he serves that purpose brilliantly. I literally cared when it seems like Jaeger was about to murder him, which is more than what I can say for most video game characters these days. Throwing his character into the mix allowed for all sorts of interesting conversations and moments to take place that just help further shed some light on the Chief's character in a way that doesn't seem forced or unnatural. It just feels fun to experience everything that's going on with all these new characters, figuring out the mystery and the events that occurred over the last 6 months. I think the antagonists are really fun. By the end of the game you really do have an understanding for what everyone is really fighting for here, starting with the Banished who've literally suffered from having their entire homeworld obliterated. At this point in the story they're just wanting both revenge as well as a new home. It makes sense that they now have this new vendetta against humanity after suffering such a blow from one of their own creations. With Escharum, who's also mourning the loss of Atriox, who's not only his mentee but also a hero to their species, being able to break away from the Covenant and begin a whole new faction that is, while definitely antagonistic, but definitely a much more fair system than what the Covenant were offering. And what's interesting about them is that they're an actual threat too, making humanity the underdog once again. I don't just want to keep saying things that you've probably heard 1,000 times at this point, but having things like this is so important to not just storytelling, but also telling a Halo story. Now, you can argue that there's an issue with the missing flood dynamic, which is definitely something I was missing sorely, but with 343 introducing the Harbinger and the Endless, it seems like they might now be the great overarching threat, or at least that's how they've been portrayed as. I think it's undeniable the Flood will make more appearances in the future, but I do find it interesting to speculate on where they lie in the story. You know, they too have their own motivations of seeking revenge after apparently being wrongly imprisoned by the Forerunners, but what implications this might actually have on the future story is still a complete mystery to me. But hey, it's once again fun to just think about this shit again, so you know they've done something right here. Now, I think it goes without saying that this is the most Halo game we've ever actually received, and I think it can be considered a love letter to the franchise. Being able to effectively incorporate so many different elements from each game seamlessly, whether it's the atmosphere and mystery of the first game, or the artistic inspirations and feel of the second one that often shines through, as well as several aspects of its and Halo 3's storytelling and visual style. I think this game fits right into the original trilogy seamlessly, while also keeping certain elements of even Halo 4's art style, which, as a fan of that game, I can really appreciate, along with the obvious ODST TAC map and several other things that fans of all Halo games will be able to recognize and appreciate. Even this feature from Halo 5. Even down to the soundtrack, taking elements from all over the place, creating just such a familiar experience. It's not like how Halo 4 and 5 felt like a completely different franchise. This feels exactly like the same universe we finished the fight in, and ultimately makes itself the sequel to those games that we've always needed. So now I'm going to be going into what I call the mid, which, don't get me wrong, definitely isn't bad, but isn't quite so amazing either. And I guess that's got to start with how it really felt like there should have been more here, which is a good complaint to have, but I think it's obvious that this is definitely a much more personal story, so I guess I can appreciate how it's not meant to be this conclusive world-ending installment, and how it actually kind of is in some ways. But something I do wish we got a lot more of is the background story on the Infinity and just that overall set of cast members. I'm not putting this in the bad section for a reason, because I feel like we did get the cast we needed here, and putting in more definitely could have added some complications to this more simpler story that they were trying to tell here. I just couldn't not mention it though. I guess this is, or at least feels like it's meant to serve very much as a part 1, and if they're able to follow up on this in a satisfying way that's also not released in half a decade, then I'd see it as a big positive. But if we're in 2025 and this still doesn't have a follow-up, then I don't think this is going to age very well. Only time will tell on this one. Another thing is that, while I don't think these characters were wasted, I do think that we maybe should have seen a little bit more of them. And look, the more I think about the Harbinger, the more I realise that she wasn't meant to be all over the story, and that they've actually been quite clever with her to an extent. But again, as a neutral, I did find myself wishing that we just got a little bit more screen time, and even more in-game time with Escharum and Jaeger. Definitely less of those hologram interactions, but it's hard to say though. Their boss fights besides the Harbinger are actually really fun, and I mean that Jaeger boss fight really gave me horror vibes, but I guess if we're in the mid section, I wasn't really too big on those monitor boss fights. Nor was I really a big fan of the monitors in general. The problem is, I'm forced to compare them to a character who's had the screen presence and nuance of 343 Guilty Spark, so they're definitely facing an uphill battle from the get-go. And I did start to appreciate that despondent Pyre towards the end, but that other one, I've got to admit, was just a bit of a pain to deal with, unfortunately. It was also just a shame that Pyre died so early on in the game, though those flashback scenes did help. It's just a shame the door's now been closed on her character. I was really excited for more conversations with Forerunner AI, but I guess we've got offensive bias to look forward to now. The Hunters were difficult. It's hard to complain about them though, I think that's exactly what they were meant to be, and in all fairness, even on my normal playthrough, it was nice to actually have a challenge somewhere, but equally, fucking hell, they were a nightmare. So, one non-negative that I do have here is that at times it does feel like they maybe played a little bit too safe. I've referenced this before, but I feel like at times they maybe tried a little bit too hard to remind you that you're playing a Halo game. Now, who would have thought I'd be criticising 343 for making a game that's too much like Halo, but it's definitely not something that takes away from the experience at all though. I mean, hearing Steve Downes and Jen Taylor reading those iconic lines again definitely played into that emotional equity we keep all hearing about. And the music played into that tenfold, and like I said, this isn't a negative, it's just something I couldn't go without mentioning. The overwhelming familiarity definitely adds to the experience here. I guess just moving forward, I hope we might take a few steps away from said familiarity, just to help further installments stand on their own a little better. Now, something that I had originally placed in the bad section is now something I've massively warmed up on, but I can still recognise it's far from flawless, and that being Cortana's sudden change of heart at the end. Now, don't get me wrong, I think I can speak for everyone here when I say that end cutscene between the two was just absolutely perfect, but I can't help but feel as if this sudden change of heart was maybe a little bit rushed. It just felt like to me that it almost came out of nowhere, but upon replaying it and taking it all in, I can also appreciate that Cortana recognized the gravity of the situation, and knowing Chief had been defeated definitely must have made an impact. I just remember that weird feeling of wondering how not only her mind had changed, but also how she was able to place herself in such a vulnerable state. But this was clearly meant to be the definitive end to her character, and you know, I think it all actually works very well to give both the ending and new beginning that we need here.
Is everyone trying to kill you?
It kinda seems like it.
Oh, wait. You're being sarcastic. He's fun. I like him.
More Banished. How come they're here?
To protect the Harbinger.
Clearly. Will it work?
What do you think?
If I told you what I...
Oh, I get it. Sarcasm. You're funny, too.
So I guess it's that part of the video where I'm gonna have to go into the things I thought were not so good. And some of these will undoubtedly be worse than others. Now I think a good starting point that I know I'm not alone in thinking of here is the lack of variety. Halo Infinite is not a boring game, far from it, but even Halo 5 had a more diverse selection of mission objectives and environments. But look, I'm not just going to say Halo Infinite is bad because there's no snow or desert biomes, but I do think the game does suffer terribly from a repetitive mission formula, which again isn't helped by only having 3 different environmental types, ranging from the Forerunner interior and exteriors, as well as the Banished ships, outposts and architecture, and then you simply have the outside. Now, all of these look great, mind. There's nothing remotely ugly about this game in the slightest. But I think it's pretty easy to see how across 15 or so missions, each with familiar mission objectives, can leave an impression that some of this campaign is a bit samey. Now, whether it's having to press numerous buttons so that another button can be pressed, or whether some paraseeds need to be gathered so that more buttons can be pressed, the fun that is to be had here is by either killing enemies and bosses, or by just grappling around the place. With how fun the game is as it is currently, you can only imagine how sick an encounter against a Scarab would have been, which is actually an excellent point. Where the fuck are they? Now, there are numerous things missing from this game, and I'm not saying these things have to be in a Halo game in order for it to be good, but let me just list a handful of things I think we were all at least expecting to a degree. The obvious Scarab that was seen in Halo Wars 2 that I'm sure many people were looking forward to fighting. I think a Warthog run definitely wouldn't have gone amiss, and the Flood would have been nice, I've got to admit, and just small things like spirits, the DMR, and, you know, campaign co-op and a mission selection screen definitely would have helped. Now, something I am missing is the whole reverting to last checkpoint feature. Like, where has that gone to? And to be honest, I think they could have done pretty well with adding some of those missing characters like Lasky and shedding more light on what happened with Blue Team. Now, it's not like this campaign was incomplete by any stretch. I mean, this is nothing like what we're seeing with the multiplayer, but I do think this campaign left a lot of room for things to be desired. Now, there is something I would say is objectively bad about this game, and ultimately harms the experience for everyone, and that is, yes, you guessed it, the change grenades and equipment function. Now, I don't think anybody had any fun switching grenades or equipment here. I mean, I found I never even changed my equipment on a normal playthrough anyway, but the shit was just not worth it. I don't know what it is, but the controller's just a nightmare, and it does you no favors, especially when you've got a camo elite charging at you while all you can find is anxiety as you get murdered. And yeah, I'm speaking from experience here. So look, when it comes to the bad, that pretty much is all there is here. I don't think there's anything objectively bad about this game apart from the switching equipment mechanic. You know, as a Halo fan, I think we've actually been treated really well here, and undeniably 343 have put in so much effort to ensure that as Halo fans we get that experience we've pretty much been demanding since Reach, 4 and obviously Halo 5. Now, I guess if I'm going to address one last criticism, it would be that I do feel that if I was not a Halo fan and didn't have that appreciation for the original games, I don't think this game would have landed for me. And that's not to say that this game is purely built on nostalgia, because it's not. I really cannot take away from the craftsmanship that's gone into this. The fun I've had here is actually unparalleled, and as a fan of Halo, they've ticked the majority of the boxes here. But I do have to say that a lot of this praise is definitely coming from a place of hoping that we're at least going to hear of a follow-up soon. Because this is definitely a part 1, and if we've got to wait another 5 years, I don't think this will age as well as we would like it to. But to keep going around in circles, 343 should be proud of themselves for this. I just want to take one last look at this scene here.
Look at us. We just keep saying goodbye, don't we? But this isn't an end. It's a chance to make amends, to rectify mistakes. And it starts here. I was wrong. I thought that I could do this on my own. But I forgot that the whole point of all of this, the entire reason that I chose you in the first place, was that we were supposed to be a team. Perfectly suited, perfectly matched, perfect.
I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching here, but to me this really felt like 343 talking to the fans here. I don't know if it was intended to be taken that way, but that's the interpretation I took from this. And I've got to say, I for one completely accept the apology. Halo has always been a big part of my life, and for me and I'm sure many others, this was going to be very much a make or break for them. If this game didn't land how it needed to, I honestly think we all would have been done for good here, but now I can actually say it's exciting to be a Halo fan again. We've now got something great here, and I really can't wait to see what 343 have in store for us next. So, I asked if Halo was back without actually giving it an answer. Now I know you've already seen the title, but it's just nice to actually say it out loud. Halo is finally back, but we do have a long way to go. But hey, thanks for watching. If you've actually made it this far into the video, then Jesus Christ, you're literally in the 1% of people right now, so quite literally, thank you for watching. My name is Mingus, and I'm still trying to figure out how to end these, so take it easy.